the other things that you put in your paper, which were kind of predictions or ideas about things that might happen, I think maybe worth just kind of exploring a few of those just to see what our views are. The first one's about less vehicle ownership. Is that going
to be I think this is a big thing, and I think it's probably one of those things that's probably a little bit close to my own heart, not owning a car myself. And you know, the investment of a vehicle, I think, is I suppose in many ways a luxury for you. And certainly living in London, you've got to have the space to have a vehicle, and the public transport's so good that how often would you use that vehicle? Well, there's obviously there's other places as well. You know, that I had a client some time ago in the Lake District. And I remember going there and he told me that the bus service from this bus stop adjacent to his house was once a week. So, you know, in that comparison to a London scale of a bus probably every couple of minutes, you've got very little chance of not owning a car, I think. But I think for big cities where there's a high density of people, autonomous vehicles are a real step forward for people, and you know, it's somewhere in between a taxi and a sort of on-demand personal transport that you could just pick up either on your street, or that, you know, it would come to you and take you wherever you need to go. And perhaps there's a selection of different vehicle types depending on whether you're two people, whether you're going on holiday for a week, whether you need to go to the tip to take some rubbish there, you know. And I think we could end up in a situation where there's actually probably an oversupply of these types of vehicles, like the I don't know if you're familiar with the bicycles that you get that you can hire that are just left where you finish your journey, and they lock up themselves, like those types of things. In the first instance, perhaps, and it does actually lead to more congestion on the roads rather than less.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see what's happening at the moment. I mean, all our indications, we have weekly reports on what's happening on transport in the conurbation. Vehicle transport is probably around 85 to 90% where it's been. Interesting, the tram, the metro system, even though it's only a limited number of routes, is running at about 45 to 50% of normal levels of use. Buses, 35 to 40%. Trains have had the biggest hit, they're down about 10, 12%. Very no significant impact on trains, which again might be partly to do with one, commuting, but also, you know, if you're looking at sort of leisure replacing commuting, there is no leisure at the moment. You know, theatres are shut, galleries are shut, parks by and large just about open, but things are beginning to ease up again. So if you look at that, then my guess would be, certainly in the next couple of years, I would think that people will go for motor transport rather than other areas. But I think that may be a short-term reaction. I think public transport will build back, some more quickly than others. The buses, as you say, have continued to have the great convenience of being flexible. You know, you can run as many buses up a route as you need, and you can make changes fairly rapidly. They can also benefit from flexible ticketing, and also are absolutely crucial for older people with pensioners' bus passes, because it gives them access to social networks that they wouldn't otherwise be able to reach. And that is, I think, one of the big concerns that we have around any potential threat to the bus network. Interesting what's happening in Manchester, where they're talking about re-regulating buses, if in effect sort of a form of franchising. Now, Manchester is rather different from West Midlands. It's got about 30 different transport operators, whereas we have one significant big operator, National Express, and a few smaller ones. So it is rather different, but they have got a very fragmented system. So whereas in the West Midlands we've actually succeeded in getting cross-modal ticketing, smart ticketing on the sort of our Swift card, the equivalent of the London Oyster card, it's much more challenging, I think, in Manchester. And Andy Burnham has made a sort of a radical step in trying to move that forward, with by and large cross-party support, although a little bit of reluctance from one or two of the council areas. And I suspect that model will probably start developing, but may not always go in exactly the same way, because after all, devolution is about doing things that work for your area and not doing things that everyone else is doing. Although not everyone understands that. So, my guess is that, cars will operate for a couple of years quite high. I think that will then start the changes which we were already seeing, certainly towards electric vehicles, will start bringing in. By that time, the electric vehicle charging infrastructure may be rather stronger than it is at the moment. And autonomous vehicles are a really interesting one. I actually went to a trial of autonomous vehicles in Coventry. It's got to be getting on for 4 or 5 years ago. And I sat in my autonomous vehicle being driven around the streets of Coventry with, all other traffic there. And a bloke there who in the driving seat with a switch in case things went rapidly wrong. It's a bit like, the dual controls when you're a learner. I was so impressed. I just thought this is going to happen, and it's going to happen, in a couple of years, and it hasn't moved nearly as quickly as I anticipated. I think there are reasons for that, partly to do with the vast amounts, how much computer can you get in your car, the practical issues, but also I think there is a reluctance, a people reluctance, and that will need to be challenged, because the great success, of course, of transport the last few years have been the Uber style vehicles, which have just been a massive success, and vast numbers of young people no longer feel the need to have a car or have a driving license even, and that is bound to work its way through the system. But what the implications of that are in terms of working conditions and so on are, I think, still to be worked out. But yeah, if things work if people want them to work. So Uber worked because people wanted to use them. Yeah. Autonomous vehicles will work if people want to use them. That's a big question mark in my mind.
Do you not think it's perhaps just simply the next step from Uber, taking the driver out of the equation?
I don't know. How many of the metro, the underground routes in London are driver free at the moment?
I'm not sure on routes. Certainly the DLR is, isn't it?
DLR,
it's only peak times where they have a driver in there, and they have this little comedy kind of unit that switches over. I know my kids love pretending they're driving the train when there's no one driving it.
What do you mean? I do. It's I think the underground could. There may be sort of labour relations issues, and probably are. Could well move have moved more quickly, and it hasn't. And I think that's a lot of that is down to people's own lack of certainty, lack of enthusiasm. Now, I'm of a certain age where, I still like to drive a car which has got a manual transmission and things like that. I know that it won't last forever, but it is how people react and how people respond to the changes that are available to them. But it is absolutely crucial, and I think that is where some of the big changes that we think we're going to see may not happen quite as quickly.
I think you're saying about perceptions. Another one that's slightly amusing. I think there's a certain group of people that want that rev of the engine, the sound of it, which you don't get with an electric vehicle. Obviously, you don't feel like you're in control of the beast.
It's possible. I mean, I can't help it because my sort of clutch control is so poor that sometimes the engine just revs anyway.
Of course, autonomous delivery, though, is I think already starting. I think we've seen these autonomous little delivery vehicles, and I think there's a huge market in that, which is the kind of the last mile delivery vehicle thing. So it's I think the perception of that is, and the acceptance of that is probably much greater than maybe driverless vehicles where people are in them. So if it's just delivering products, it's not quite so scary sounding or looking.
But I'd say that there's probably resistance about drones doing that in terms of flying objects, should we say.
Yeah.
I can't see people taking kindly to thousands of drones flying over their houses and heads and every day, and perhaps some of them not working quite right and dropping parcels or falling out the sky.
Well,
could be serious damage there.
They're incredibly noisy as well. I mean, that's the thing. They're helicopters basically, and when you see a real helicopter approaching, you don't see it. You hear it before it even gets anywhere close. I mean, it makes a lot of noise, and the drones do that as well. I know Amazon are piloting drones in America, helicopter drones in America for delivery.
Different places. I've got to say, I have concerns. As someone who's a large part of whose family income seems to go on bird food at the moment, the local resident wildlife, I don't think would take very kindly to it, and might well, you might well see the woodpeckers finding another way of attacking the drones.
Yeah.
I live a mile from the centre of Wolverhampton, but the area I live in is heavily wooded. How would you get a drone down? I don't know. And as for autonomous deliveries, they'd have to improve the sat navs, I think, quite considerably. The one experience of the last 12 months has been watching how many Ocado and Tesco delivery vans end up driving up the alleyway at the rear of my sort of row of houses rather than the road at the front. And when you've got a takeaway coming, the last thing you want is to find it being deposited outside the back gate rather than brought to your door. So, let's get things right first.
I can see though that at the moment there's an ever increasing sort of on-demand requirement of people from a shopping perspective. I think wanting that something comes into their mind, they look at it on their phone now rather than having to go to a computer. Prior to that, they'd be going to having to go to a shop and plan a visit to the shop and find the right shop. Now everything's available at the touch of a button, as it was, and then you can get it delivered as well. I don't see that slowing down. I see that demand will increase, if nothing, which then makes me think that perhaps autonomous vehicles are the way forwards, but will probably lead to more congestion than we have at the moment, rather than a reduction in use of either public footpaths or highways, depending on how far it was.
At the moment, white van deliveries are almost certainly pushing up pollution levels to, even though sort of other traffic has reduced. It does seem very clear to me that is one of the issues. And the other is, of course, it's going to have a major impact on our retail centres. Now, we've already seen that over the last 5 or 10 years. But I think you're right, that will increase, and that again will put further pressure on what is the role, what is the future of city centres, whatever size the city is, or indeed town centres. And that is clearly going to change very markedly. There are already a lot of views that city centres must become sort of entertainment venues. Well, clearly the last 12 months has prevented that from happening, but I suspect that will start moving back. And so, again, the uses of city centres will need to change. There will be more residential properties there, although I am concerned that we will end up with some rather poor quality small properties as a result of that, and that we actually need to be clear to developers that if particularly if planning restrictions are removed without sufficient thought, we will end up with an awful lot of buildings where there are flats with no outside windows, and where there are tiny spaces where people do actually need a bit of space to move around. So I do think we need to make sure that there's a variety, particularly if one of the things I'm certainly thinking we ought to be encouraging is bringing older people back into city centres. They then have access to all the facilities they need without the autonomous vehicles to get them there. And it is one of the ways of rebuilding our cities, actually making sure that they are fit for purpose for all generations and not just for young people. Now, that may involve a little bit of zonal thinking. I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily. And some parts of cities becoming almost sort of urban villages, whereas others remain the sort of the noisier, livelier entertainment zones and almost student villages. So that will happen, and probably to be welcomed, so that we don't have our city centres being reduced. But again, predictions about what's going to happen to cities have been seriously wrong in the past. I can remember again in the early 1980s, we were looking at the population of Liverpool and how quickly it had declined over the course of the 20th century. And there were people sitting there smugly saying in 20 years, sheep will be able to roam the streets of Liverpool quite safely.
There were some rather poor political remarks about managed urban decline, was it? Or something like that about Liverpool?
We've seen that, almost going back to the days of County Durham and the mining villages, the D villages in Durham, which another catastrophic set of policy choices that were being driven by people who thought they knew better. But Liverpool came back.
The city centre,
Liverpool in a way no one could have predicted.
Yeah, Liverpool won. The redevelopment of the city centre of Liverpool is just spectacularly successful. I mean, it is one of the best shopping experiences, pedestrianisation and shopping experiences anywhere in the country. I mean, it's tremendous.
But I don't think it's just that. There's also waterfront, the work done on the waterfront, the cultural things. I don't know that the Garden Festival had a huge amount of impact on it, but it may well have done as well. They had a load of money, a load of initiatives went in. There were flagship schemes all over the place. But now it's to a degree it's that joined upness. Sometimes the cities have lost. This may go against what I was saying earlier about zoning and so on. But there was certainly, I can remember Bristol 20 odd years ago when there were gaps between the sort of the university area and then the shopping area, and then the area down by the railway station at Temple Meads. And some of those gaps you wouldn't necessarily want to be walking through, even as a youngster at certain times of day or night. But things change, and those gaps have been closed up by other sorts of development, and largely by private development, rather than stuff which was necessarily directed by the city council.
Is there a future for retail in the high streets, or is it's about taking the underutilized assets of these retail properties and doing something different with them? I mean, I think there's going to be a mixture going forward. I think there's some of them might be converted into last mile distribution centers for the likes of Amazon and places like that, and maybe some sort of a quasi distribution place, but others could well be converted to resi or something completely different. I think, like you say, just to repurpose.
I think you're right. It will be a mixture, but it does need to have a degree of bravery, which sometimes our planning bureaucracies don't necessarily always display. For example, you need maybe to be a bit less demanding around the covenants on a property. If you've got someone coming in who wants to take on a property and you're saying, well, you can only have it if there's a 15 or 20-year covenant, and basically they're going to walk away. But if you say 5 years, maybe with a break clause and so on, at least you get the investment in and you get something happening, and you've got to have a bit of confidence that this will then continue. So that's one thing that needs to happen. The second thing that needs to happen, obviously, is a levelling of the playing field between online and high street retailers. The business rate system we know is bust. Desperately needs reform. I mean, wiser people than I have said, a 2% sales tax would, across the piece, would bring the same amount of money in, and it would hit everybody in the same way. and that's fine. The one group I am concerned about with that sort of approach are those smaller businesses with below 50,000 traceable value, where they've had really serious discounts, and would they keep those discounts with the sales tax? I don't know, but there are a lot of people coming up with some good ideas around what's going to happen with retail, and I still think the high street experience is one people would enjoy, providing it's linked into a whole set of other things, whether it's food and beverage outlets, coffee shops, ubiquitous coffee shops, all the other things, and destination tourism. Budget hotels in cities will boom, I suspect, as people decide I'm not going to go, say, to Birmingham, Shrewsbury, or Wolverhampton to shop for a day. I'm going to go there. I'm going to stop overnight. I'm going to go to the theatre. I'm going to go to a football match. I'm going to even go to the races in our case, or any other set of activities. National Trust properties around the place, museums, art galleries. Make a 2 days overnight, and you've got day and a half, 2 days with open time to do whatever you like.
Yeah, lots of people are talking about retail only surviving if it goes into being more experiential, the experience of going into that retail outlet, which I think is important. But I agree with what Roger's saying as well, that it's the overall experience for the area that you're going to. People will always want to have a day out, have a trip somewhere, have a different experience. Simply having one shop there that's going to give you an experience, I don't think is going to have the same demand as a whole area of different experience. Something that's sort of structured and cultivated to be more than just a group of shops collected together.
Yeah, I think there's also variety, and I think that I in my head I think there's something around almost the pop-up culture, where if the high street could just evolve and change, and it's changing every single year, so it's different, it's not just the same, you get the same set of experiences and shops and cafes in the high street. So if landlords and entrepreneurial occupiers and retailers could come together and say, yeah, that's fine, these spaces are available to come and take on a 3-month license, and it's if it works, it works. If it doesn't, that's right, shake hands and go away, and somebody else comes and have a go. And you
keeps it fresh, doesn't it? It keeps people interested.
Yeah,
but it's not just variety. The successes of some of the smaller towns in the first decade of this century were frequently based around certain things: farmers' markets, particular niche markets, but also things like antiques and so on. And if you're going somewhere, then again, you're not going to want to go to one antique shop. You're going to want to go to several. It's where you have to roll out hotelling's theory again about location of businesses. And if you've got 5, 6, 7 antique shops, then it's going to be much more attractive for someone to go there than if there's just 1 or 2. So, those sorts of areas and that sort of specialization is also going to be quite important. So you might have places specializing, I don't know, in bicycles. Why not? Go to a place where you can try out a load of different bicycles. It's great having Wiggle and all the other places which will sell you something online if you know what you want. But if you don't know what you want to try things, well, go somewhere where you can, there are several different retailers offering things. And you've got the hope that that competition will drive prices down.
Just on that theme with you saying bicycles, it reminded me of not that they're sponsoring this at all, Decathlon. There's a huge Decathlon supermarket type place, and they sell, I don't know if you're aware of them, they sell all different sports equipment for every different type of sport you could possibly imagine: canoeing, football, bikes, all kinds of things. It's almost a day out going there with my kids. It's fantastic.
Well, I could use the frightening word IKEA.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Where you recently seen Dominic Sandbrook talking quite lyrically about a visit to Wednesbury as a child from Bridge North to his little trip out to IKEA, and how wonderful it was looking at all these Swedish meatballs. Yes, no.
And the hot dogs are pretty good as well. And so are the donuts.
There's a lot of car park to lose your car in.
Just going back to the comments about more people living in the city centre, I'm a big advocate for more mixed-use developments, and certainly not abandoning a CBD type arrangement, but breaking it down certainly around the fringes so that you have more mixed use. And in my eyes, I see that as being more of a 24-hour usage for the spaces, because you've got residential working with office spaces. People are going from one space to the next, which are quite close to each other. But that's also servicing the retail and more than just an office type timescale, or more than just a weekend type timescale when people aren't working. So it gives more footfall to the retail, which I can see bringing life back to the streets as well.
Yeah, and also what it gives you is that opportunity to close what we used to have, this dreadful gap between 5 o'clock when people started going home and 7 o'clock when they were arriving for any entertainment venues, and then later for clubs, pubs, nightclubs and whatever. But there was always a big yawning gap in the middle, and it was difficult to sustain some of the places you would want to sustain given that uneven level of trading. But certainly mixed use is got to be one mantra to be rolled out.
In November, the government published the National Infrastructure Strategy, which pointed out some of the investments going forward, and as Boris Johnson said, to level up the UK economy. And just quickly, just some interesting stats here. £27.5 billion investment in English roads until 2025, £7.1 billion investment in the National Home Build Fund, £23 billion funding for HS2 until 2025, and £4 billion, which is a levelling up fund that will allow areas to bid for up to £20 million to directly fund projects. So the government's seeing infrastructure and those sort of types of investments as ways to kind of kickstart the economy or level up the economy. And my interest, well, I think it's a very positive thing as well. But I think is there a question mark around, this is going to be slightly controversial maybe, is there a question mark around HS2? If people are not traveling and commuting as much and moving around as much, is HS2 still a needed piece of infrastructure for the country?
Well, I think HS2 you have to look at as an investment for the next century, not an investment for the next 5 years.
Correct. Yes.
So, I mean, it does put in an enormous amount of new capacity. It does open up some of the existing lines for greater use for freight. And freight is the unspoken part of infrastructure. It's not the sexy part of infrastructure. Yet freight, if you talk to any businesses in my part of the world, then how they get their goods to the ports is really important. And with Brexit, which ports they're going to go to as well. Those are important issues. And I think the role of rail in doing that, given that particularly HGVs will almost certainly not be suitable for electric power, and may have to look at other things like hydrogen. I think we're possibly a little bit jury out on some of that. So, HS2 I think needs to be looked at as a much longer term package of investment. Some of the shorter term investments I think we perhaps need to look at a little bit more critically. There's a lot of focus on reopening rail lines. Well, those rail lines closed basically because they weren't being used. And there were reasons for that. Now, some of them are the change demographics changed in certain cases, but rail is relatively inflexible. You can get on a train, you can go from where the train comes from to where it goes to.
Or somewhere in between.
you haven't got a lot of flexibility. Yeah, or somewhere in between. But some of the other options. I mean, I think we've looked at all of them over the course of years. Metro and tram is a good way of moving people from cars into public transport. They're more comfortable doing that than moving onto a bus, in my experience. And works, but again, it's not cheap. If you take the wires out, you reduce the cost. So a very light rapid transit, the sort of thing being experimented on in Coventry and at the National Centre, which is being just been established in Dudley. I think again that gives much more opportunity particularly for people like the key cities, where you wouldn't necessarily want or be able to deliver a massive tram network based on rails. Might be able to offer something a little bit, which would work using the very light rapid transit model. And then I think things like the guided buses and other things that look a little bit like the old trolley buses in some respects. Again, much underrated in terms of their potential. But the difficulty is knowing which mode to put your money on, a bit like the horses in Grand National tomorrow.
Yes.
Which mode do you think is going to work? And there is no easy way of predicting what's going to be successful. And my guess is that a lot of these will actually could end up as being a little bit of white elephants or turkeys, where others will work fantastically well. Now, I just don't have the crystal ball to look in to tell you which is which. But I can come back in 10 years' time and say, well, I told you some of them would work and some of them wouldn't.
Well, we'll have to have the discussion in 10 years then, Roger, to see how it goes. So, Andy, any sort of final words from you before we sign off?
I think I'd like to say that I think the potential for the future is very bright for us from a sustainability and environmental perspective. There's a mindset now to drive things towards that hasn't occurred, certainly in my lifetime, I don't think, before. And also a need as well. There's a real kind of scientific need being put out there and a drive by a whole generation or multiple generations of people now to look at the world in a different way than simply the capitalist way of how much can we produce, how fast can we produce it, and how much can we sell it for. There's now a desire to look at what's the impact of what we're doing a lot more, both personally and from a business perspective. So I see the future as being a greener future, hopefully, my fingers crossed, more self-powered transport, more zero carbon transport, and more concern about how you're living and the energy in which you're using and the resources you're using and where those resources are coming from.
Right. Thank you, Andy. And Roger, any last words from you?
I think hearts and minds I'd come back to again. Let's find out what people find attractive and then actually cater for them, rather than I think, as we perhaps have too much in the past, say this is what we think you're going to like, and if you don't like it, well, sod it. We've just spent a vast amount of money on it, and you're going to have to lump it.
Very good final word. But can I just say to both of you, thank you, and it's been a delight to have the conversation or be part of the conversation and things. Roger, especially, thank you for being our guest today. Really, really valuable insights and thoughts and ideas. And I know you don't have all the answers, but none of us do. And I think that's going to be the conversation in 10 years to see what actually really has transpired in terms of the future of infrastructure and things that we're going to be seeing. Andy, thanks very much as well. I think your paper has generated quite a lot of interest already, and I think hopefully the readers or the viewers, of this podcast will actually take the opportunity to read your paper as well to see some of the ideas that you put forward. So that's it for this particular podcast. And so just wanted to say thank you again, and stay tuned for the next one in this series. There's going to be a third one coming up very soon from the MCM Skunkworks program. So just want to say thank you very much and signing off.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks very
Thanks a
much.
lot.